I'm super excited to talk with you about some of the work that we've partnered together to create for you. Hopefully, you'll find the tool useful. I have no conflicts or disclosures, any financial disclosures to share with you all. I do speak about this across the nation, but I don't have any conflicts of interest. So I just wanted to start by recapping a little bit around trauma-informed care, especially for those of you who maybe haven't seen the module yet. So trauma-informed care is really, I call it a way of being. So versus just something where you take a class and then say, oh, I'm trauma-informed. So it does take practice, and I always remind folks to give yourself a lot of grace as you're learning to do something new. So with trauma-informed care, really the framework is around the 4 Rs, which are that we all realize the widespread impact of trauma, and we realize that everyone probably has experienced some form of trauma in their lifetime. And we recognize those signs and symptoms of what trauma looks like in our patients and our families, our coworkers, and ourselves. And those could be strong reactions, avoidance, irritability. And then we respond by fully integrating what we know about trauma into our daily practice and our policies, our procedures. And then we resist re-traumatization. And even when we have to do hard things, I always say like putting an infant on a CPS hold or what have you. Those are hard things that we do in our work, but we can do it in a way that causes the least amount of re-traumatization for that family. So on the right from SAMHSA is the key principles of a trauma-informed care or approach, and that is establishing safety, trust and transparency, having peer support, empowerment, which is voice and choice, collaboration and mutuality, and then understanding the history of the people that we serve. Next slide. So with this particular model here that I'm showing you, this is from Bruce Perry's sequence of engagement. And I really like it because we can use this with our patients when we're at the bedside, but we can also use this model of engaging with people who are our staff, right? So as we're thinking about specifically around debriefing, we're looking at when people are not regulated, they're kind of showing up in their lizard brain, and this can happen after a serious safety event. And so as we come together, kind of figuring out how are we going to help people regulate, because we have to do that before we can relate to them and they can relate to us, and definitely before we can really start to talk about solutions or critical thinking or judgment. And so this is just a way that we approach folks. And it's because when we are under stress or have experienced something traumatic, we kind of live in that lower part of our brain, and our upper brain, the more developed part, kind of goes offline. So that's where we're starting today, is thinking about how we come together to actually do a trauma-informed debrief where we recognize that people aren't always showing up in their full brain. Next slide. So this is the obstetric debriefing tool, and you can use this with staff following any patient safety event. But I will let you know that I have folks who use a debrief tool for all births or for all deliveries. And it really kind of helps them just quickly go through. It's a little bit shorter version, but they like to do it for everything, just to look in a way to say, how are we doing? And sometimes what we might not think is traumatic, because it's all in just a day's work, can be quite traumatic for maybe our newer staff, as well as our patients and families. So this really is meant to walk anyone through how to do an effective debrief through a trauma-informed lens. So if you haven't done it before, I always say we do a really good job of waiting for someone to come and do something for us or to help us. And this really empowers folks to be able to say, I've got this tool. It gives me some instruction on how to walk through it, hopefully helps get them more comfortable over time. But if it's the first time or the second time or the 10th time and they're still not comfortable, this gives a way to really walk through it so they can continue their practice. It makes it easier. So anyone can do it. We don't have to wait for manager to come in, from home at 2 o'clock in the morning. So, and you can use this whether it's a hot debrief, shortly after the event, or if it's the following day. It's really designed to help the facilitator complete this. And the first part is the background section. And the background section has the date, a checklist to make it easy, unless, of course, it's something that's not listed. But here's some of our most common things that we typically see or hear about that maybe can cause some stress. And we need to debrief this to say, what do we know happened, what went well, and what can we do better? And then a list of who was there. I think that's really important because as we walk through this and you see that last section is submitting this to whoever you've designated your leadership person who wants to collect these and see, it really gives an opportunity for follow-up and as well as peer support or other support that maybe one of your staff may need. Next slide. So with that background, this is the part that just needs to be done before you start the debrief. So whoever is facilitating the debrief in 1 to 3 sentences gives a very objective description. And then you'll be asking your team if you've hit the nail on the head. So when you think about something like if it was a postpartum hemorrhage, it may be, patient in room 59, Gravida 2, Para 1, delivered at this time. Quantitative blood loss was this much, and here's what we did. Like, this is what it was. So postpartum hemorrhage, just in 1 to 3 sentences, that's very objective. Next slide. And then the facilitator really helps guide the team through each of the steps. And so the first one is usually as folks come together at the very beginning, or after you've kind of, hey, here's what we're here for, right? Thank you for coming. It really is to let folks know exactly what you're going to do and what we're not going to do. So thank you for coming together. It's important that we debrief this event. We're going to focus on our systems, processes, teamwork, communication, and not individuals. The goal of the debrief is to learn so we can improve safety and quality of care. So you're really setting a good solid ground here on making sure that we are being psychologically safe environment. And so that safety piece is important with trauma-informed care. And then the way that I do number 2 is it really is about a quick check-in. And I like to do on a scale and using of the hand, because I think if I were to have my whole group of staff around me and I would say, how's everybody doing? They're all kind of looking at each other like, I'm not really comfortable saying that, or I'm looking at so-and-so across the way because, if she is a 2 and I am a 5, right? I want to know what's happening. So before we begin, just find out how are you doing physically and emotionally. And a 1 means I'm not doing well at all. And a 5 is I'm good to go and I don't need any more support. And maybe you could count on me to help give support to my peers. So I kind of do it on a count of 3, like rock, paper, scissors, but in providing them some direction and just saying on a count of 3, show me with a show of hands how you're doing. And maybe in those notes, you're just writing everybody's, 4 to 5. But you definitely want to know those folks who are a 1 or a 2, right, for follow-up. And then as I read as the facilitator, I read the description, my 1 to 3 sentences that I started out with, and I just say, here's what we know happened. And we, again, keep it very objective. And then I ask the group if they agree, and I say things like, does this sound like an appropriate assessment of what happened, or does anyone see this situation differently? And that really helps to just kind of keep us on the same page and to make sure we have all the facts. But again, this is a space where we're making sure that we aren't blaming an individual or calling someone out. This really is about keeping the facts and revising if there's something with the facts, with the objective part that we're missing. So sometimes I'll say, is this an appropriate objective assessment of what happened? Is there any other facts that we're missing? And just keeping it to the facts. Next page. The next thing we want to do is identify what went well. And as the person who's leading the debrief, I'm asking folks to share what they felt went well during the event. And then I like to share some options from this list on here. And I can also add some general comments from the team. Again, we're really focusing on, I mean, a lot of times people will say, Dr. So-and-so did an excellent job of, telling us what they needed, or nurse so-and-so had such great situational awareness on the fetal monitoring strip and was able to really get folks at the bedside in a timely fashion. But you're really looking at kind of these top 5 things, right? Early recognition and response, teamwork and support, situational awareness. Did everybody know what their role was, or what they were supposed to be doing? And how was our communication? So those are the things as far as what went well. And then the next page. And I think on this slide, you're really able to see we're using some of those same things to say, but these are the areas that didn't go well. So communication, role clarity, teamwork and support. Were there any delays in getting to the OR or opening something up, or delays in anesthesia coming to the OR to meet you there? And do we have any issues with their equipment and supplies? And again, in this, we're working on sharing opportunities for learning. Again, not focusing on individuals, and being able to share some of these things if they have a hard time articulating that. And lastly, thanking the team for debriefing and letting them know what the next steps are is super important, right? So you can share what supports are available for the team. So perhaps maybe at 2 o'clock tomorrow, we're having our chaplain or our employee assistance folks coming, what have you. If you have peer support, we have folks that are here. We actually have a psychologist who is amazing and comes to a lot of our debriefs, or is available afterwards if folks want to have private conversations or need support. And then letting them know that these forms will go to our leadership team for follow-up. So you may have someone circle back with you if there's something that we need. And then the facilitator can just say who they submitted it to and the date. Next slide. This follow-up portion is the facilitator can assist with this or help with it, but it really is for leadership. And so we do ask, and of course you can include this in the debrief section, has anyone talked to the patient or family? Because that's a really important part that we often miss, right? And it's hard to do patient-centered care if we also aren't including them in our debriefs. But if they had any questions or concerns, or if there's any additional follow-up needed, this is really important. And we know that sorry matters. And even if it was something that was by no fault of our own, was just a consequence of a risk that they had. So maybe a ruptured uterus from a trial of labor after cesarean. But we're still coming back to say we're sorry. Even if the patient chose it, even if we are meeting all of our standards of care, it's easy to say, I'm so sorry that this happened. I know this wasn't a part of your plan. And help them understand. I always like to use the instance of a postpartum hemorrhage, even before you leave the birth, to be able to say, you bled a little bit more than we anticipated. Here's what we're doing about it. Here's what we did, and here's what we're going to do about it to follow up with you to make sure that and here's some things that you can tell us should your condition worsen. So, and then the action items really are for the facilitator and the leader to work through. Here was some system or process issues that were identified as a result of the debrief. I think oftentimes in the debrief, we identify the things that didn't go well, or a piece of equipment that's broken, or something wasn't in its right place. And then I've had a situation where I come in the next day, and one nurse who thank goodness that we have these folks, but just said, I went in and I restocked everything in the OR where it's supposed to be, but then we don't really have a plan to say, how do we prevent this from happening again? And so thinking about how you're going to make sure that anything that's identified is rectified. And then, is there any follow-up needed? Do we have to notify our clinical risk team or our, our patient safety folks? Do we need to put in an incident report? Do we need to escalate this to maybe our other leaders that are, over safety and quality, or do we need to bring this to say, does this need to be an RCA? And then what support do our staff need? So oftentimes, yes, education, that's really low hanging fruit for an action item, but it's not always the most effective. Like, what else do we need to do? Does staff need leaders to come and round on them or check in with them? Do they need some wellness support or a consultation? Peer support, or again, chaplain, or if you have a psychologist or someone, a social worker that's willing to meet, and then any follow-up notes. And so this is super important for you to just kind of track those debriefs, but in doing it in a way that's trauma informed, because what we want to make sure is that our staff feel supported, and it will improve your culture and your psychological safety. So this just becomes more of the norm. We always say in healthcare, when I say, do you do debriefs? And the teams say, oh, yes, we do. But I jokingly say it's kind of like asking my 4-year-old son, did you brush your teeth? I'm implying that he did it well. But really, it doesn't necessarily mean that just because we do it doesn't mean that we can't improve on it, or that we aren't, that we're doing it well. So. Thank you so much. Feel free if you have any questions around the whole trauma-informed module, or trauma-informed care, or how to be a more trauma-responsive leader. But also, if you have specific questions around the debrief form, I am happy to answer. And I would also love feedback to say, if you could change anything about it, what would you change? So I think that's really important for me to hear as well.